Okay, so thinking back to what you've completed in the lessons, have a go at this starter task, see if you can answer the 5 questions. The link is on Teams. So our learning outcomes for today, we are looking at the second energy system, the lactate system today. So we are looking at how the lactate system provides energy, the activities that we use the lactate system for, how much ATP it creates, how big the yield is, and the recovery time of the system. So the lactate system then. So once we have PC and it's depleted from that ATP-PC system at around 10 seconds, the lactate system takes over and regenerates, resynthesizes ATP from the breakdown of glucose. So the body needs to find an alternative fuel and the lactate system becomes the dominant supplier. So this is an anaerobic system without oxygen, and we do use a process called glycolysis, and that's the breaking down of glucose. So the lactic system is an important energy system because it provides very quick supply of ATP for intense short bursts of activity, usually around 2 to 3 minutes. So the duration of the system depends upon the intensity of the activity. So the less intense the activity, the longer it will last. So what can we use from food as an energy source? Have a think about that question. So going to the answer of your question then. So we use carbohydrates at rest and we convert them to a simple sugar called glucose. Okay, so glucose is taken up by the muscles and liver and converted into glycogen and stored until we need it, essentially. So glycogen can be used to form ATP, and that's how we use this in the lactate system. So in the liver, it can be converted into glucose and transported to the muscles via the blood. So if you take a look on the right-hand side, this is the process, and we'll run you through this process in the next slide. So the process then. So steps of this lactate system. The first step is that stored glycogen is converted to glucose. Okay, then glucose has been broken down by a series of enzymes into 2-pyruvic acid or pyruvate. Okay, after this, okay, that releases the energy that we need. Okay, so 2 ATP are used to fuel glycolysis, and 4 ATP are created in total from this whole process, glycolysis. Okay, so the body gains 2 ATP to use for muscular contraction from that one glucose molecule. So the yield for the lactate system is 2 ATP. So just explaining this breakdown then, the breakdown of glucose to synthesize ATP results in the creation of pyruvic acid and hydrogen. Okay, so essentially this muscle becomes increasingly acidic because there's more hydrogen ions created, and we don't like hydrogen ions. Okay, they're not good for our muscles. Okay, hydrogen ions make muscle cells acidic, which give us that burn when we exercise, that lactic acid. Okay, so the normal pH of muscle cells is 7.1, but if you have too much hydrogen, it can reduce it to 6.5, and so your muscle contraction is impaired. That might be where you're more likely to suffer from cramp and fatigue. So further to what I have just discussed, if we look all the way down, we obviously have created lactic acid, and that's due to not having any oxygen in this whole process. Okay, so we use carrier molecules, okay, called a NAD plus to help remove the hydrogen. So this system actually operates without oxygen. So to prevent the muscle flooding from acid, pyruvic acid uses hydrogen to make lactic acid. Okay, so that turns the lactate and hydrogen to that lactic acid. So the NAD plus turns to NADH, which deposit the hydrogens during the electron transport chain and will cover that when we come to the aerobic system, because that is a stage in the aerobic system. Okay, so if there is no oxygen, which in this case for the lactate system there's no oxygen, NADH cannot release the hydrogen, so therefore they build up in the cell. Okay, so that's what happens in the lactate system. If we were to think later on in the aerobic system, that's when that NAD plus turns to NADH, okay, which deposits the hydrogen into the electron transport chain. But for now, that's not happening. There's no oxygen. We cannot release the hydrogen at all. That's why we have this build-up of lactic acid. To summarize then, we've got carbohydrates, okay? They store glycogen in our muscles, okay? We convert that into glucose through the process of glycolysis. If you like to, you can remember the enzyme that breaks that down, okay? It's called phosphofructokinase, a difficult one to say, okay? When we complete glycolysis, that creates 2 ATP, but it also uses 2 ATP in the process, okay, but that creates our energy. Unfortunately, the byproducts of that process are pyruvic acid, okay, because we've got no O2, it means we've got a build-up of hydrogen ions, and that creates our lactic acid. Okay, and lactic acid is due to that acidity caused by the increase in hydrogen ions. OBLA then, onset of blood lactate accumulation. So the anaerobic energy production can only continue until the buildup of lactic acid causes the muscle to fatigue. So otherwise known as the lactate threshold, you might have called it. At this point, this is where the lactate pools in the muscle. So essentially it means that the lactic acid is being created faster than we can remove it. Okay, faster than the muscle can remove it. The lactate will then move into the bloodstream, creating that burning sensation in the active muscle, so causing potentially cramp. Okay, so OBLA is where we prevent oxygen binding to hemoglobin. That inhibits the energy production when trying to move it into the aerobic system. Okay, so factors that can affect this. The intensity, so if we've got high intensity, that will obviously increase the onset or make the onset more rapid, okay? Muscle fiber types, so if we've got type 2 muscle fibers, they're the best to have to delay this onset of blood lactate accumulation. The ability to remove lactate, obviously the better you are at removing lactate, the less likely you are to suffer from the buildup, okay? Training adaptation, so if you train your lactate system, you can delay the onset of blood lactate accumulation as well. Recovery time then, the removal of lactic acid from the muscles and blood, okay, it can take around 1 to 2 hours depending on the intensity and duration. So have a think about the advantages now. The advantages for the lactate system. Obviously oxygen is not required, so we can supply energy fast. We store a lot of glycogen in the body, and there's not many chemical reactions that are needed to create ATP. Okay, disadvantages are the byproducts. Okay, this is a big disadvantage. The lactic acid reduces the pH of the muscle, obviously making it acidic. Okay, this prevents enzymes from working and therefore can cause muscular fatigue, which is not great for athletic performance. Your task then is to complete the table for the lactate system. Okay, so our results should be as follows. Okay, so main components are the ATP yield is 2, creates 2 ATP. The byproducts are lactic acid. The duration, it can last up to 3 minutes. And the recovery is 1 to 2 hours. Great for 400 meters or repeated efforts. So here's an exam question that you might see. Have a go, and then on the next slide you will see the mark scheme enabling you to answer the question. So here's our results here. Very simply, the lactate system can supply energy quickly for the station because it doesn't require oxygen. Therefore, they can complete that 45-second station, providing a high energy yield for 2 to 3 minutes.